Marique Bartoldus. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Good. I pronounced your name correctly, so we're over the first hurdle. So that's good, right?
It's all easy from here.
Yes. But I wanted to start out thanking Vic Ferrari, our mutual friend, who has his podcast NYPD Through the Looking Glass. He interviewed you, and he got a hold of me and he says, "Oh, you got to interview her. She's a great interview. She's a great guest." And I'm like, absolutely. So I went out and I bought your book.
Thank
20 and
you.
out, and I listened to the podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. So here we are.
Thank you. And thanks to Vic too. He's good people. He's a funny
Yeah, he
guy.
is. He's
Yeah.
hilarious. I love Vic. He is a funny guy. He's very entertaining, and his podcast is doing really well in his books. So I love to see that.
Yeah,
So
me
I
too.
wanted to start out with felonious mopery. Full disclosure, we talked on the phone, before the interview one time, and you said something about like, oh my God, I didn't know other people use that slang. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it was from a podcast that you had done previously
Oh,
with Miss
okay.
Butcher. Yeah. So it was felonious mobbery is a term that you use when I guess it's like something's just not right with somebody, or you lock somebody up and it's just they were doing some kind of shady thing, or you stop somebody because they were acting like a little weird, or something was off with them. And it's like, why are you stopping me? And I'm like, you know what? It's just felonious mobbery. It's just you're a mope, and it's got to be a felony because there's no other way why you would be acting in this manner. It's something's up. I haven't figured it out yet, but we'll get there. For right now, you got felonious Mulberry. That's what you're up to. It's no good, no matter what way you look at
Well,
it.
it's funny because it's like it's a universal, and mope could be anybody or any background, any whatever. It's like, yep,
The
that's a mope.
universal
Yep,
term. Yep.
yep, doing
Yeah.
mope stuff.
They all move the same way. It doesn't matter. It's not the specific person. It's the type of behavior that they're engaged in that warrants
Yes.
that title. Yeah.
I'm glad it's universal. That makes me happy.
It's interesting. I don't know where it originated from, but it's great that it went across the nation. That's pretty funny.
Yes, absolutely. So let's start at the beginning here. How old were you when you got into the police academy in New York?
I was 21, I think.
Okay, just a
21 or
baby.
22.
God, that's young.
Yeah.
Looking back, I bet you're like, damn, that's young.
Yeah, I mean, I had no injuries, right? I was nice and healthy. I had energy. I didn't need like an afternoon nap to get through the day. It was great. I was able to like run through the academy like it was nobody's business, you know? It was good. There's some people that I worked with that got on in their 30s, and it was like it was hard for them to keep up. So I felt bad.
That was
It
me.
was a
I
good
was
time for me
30.
too.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
sorry.
Oh God, it was horrible. I mean, I could do push-ups and sit-ups till the cows come home. I love doing calisthenics. I've been a gym rat all my life, but those runs, oh my God, those 21
Yeah.
year old kids were just like, it's only 9 years difference, but holy cow, it really makes a huge difference, I think.
It does. A buddy of mine that I went to high school with, I ended up running into him 10 years later on the job. We ended up at the same scene of like a funeral for a gang guy or whatever. And I run into him, I'm like, bro, I haven't seen you since high school. I didn't know you were a cop. And he's like telling me about it. He's like, yeah, I just graduated the academy. And he was, I think we were like 32 or 33 at the time. And he was telling me, he's like, these young kids, he goes, I can't keep up with them. So when they go on a foot pursuit, I just stay behind and I gather all the gear that they drop as they're chasing the perp. And then I just wait, I meet up with them where they pick the perp. And I'm like, here's your flashlight, here are your handcuffs, here's your radio. He's like, so I just give out the gear. I'm like, well, yeah, you're very necessary. We, we need a guy for that.
You need a guy to do the broadcast because when as long as you keep him in eyesight, because that was me. I've never been fast in my life. I worked with guys that could actually like hurdle 4 foot fences, without even touching them. And I'm like
Yeah.
in awe of that. And for me, it's like a huge accomplishment. I'm like, oh my God, another fence. I'm like, this sucks. So at least, I could at least broadcast for, my partner that is, running like a gazelle after the bad guy who is like running like Jesse Owens all of a sudden. You're like,
Yeah.
God, where does
Yeah.
this come from? Five seconds before that, they're moping around and dragging their feet, and now all of a sudden they're Olympic class sprinters, and you're like, oh
Yeah.
God. Why do you hate me, Lord? This sucks.
Yeah,
But
I'm like, I feel like I have a piano strapped to my back as I'm trying to
yeah.
run after perps with the gear on. I'm like,
Oh,
I
I
just
know.
legs move faster.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So you get into the police academy. What were you doing before you were a cop?
I was going to school to college in John Jay of criminal justice in Manhattan. At first I was thinking I maybe going the law route. I was taking a lot of law classes, but in the back
Mm,
of my head, I was like going to go to the police department. And then I was working, so I was going to school full time and I was working full time at like a relay and reed switch company on the border of Nassau and Queens. So it was tough working full time and going to school full time, but I was excited to join the police department, especially
you
the NYPD.
wow, not too many people do that. And I did the same thing. I worked in grocery stores. My last
Yeah.
job in grocery stores was Piggly Wiggly. Yeah, I was the night manager. We call it the wobbly hog. And I worked like 35, 40 hours a week. And sometimes I'd, get more hours. And I was trying to go to college full time. And that's no easy life. I for the first 2 years I stayed at home and saved money. And then I moved into the college that I was living at. And I was the only guy. There was like 8 of us in this just big old party house, more or less, that had a job. And I'm working like full time. They're drunk, they're stoned, they're doing this, they're doing that. And I'm like, yeah, it's 6 a.m. I have to go to work and unload trucks. Yay. It
Yeah.
just it didn't mix well at all. That's a tough life.
Yeah, it was hard, but I wanted to get a degree before I went into the police department.
Yeah,
So I mean, I was going for like a criminal justice major with the law classes and stuff, and then the police department called me and I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna do like a police science major and just kind
mm,
of take a few less credits and still be able to graduate with a bachelor's degree. So I kind
sure.
of cheated a little bit and just cut a bunch of the law classes out and took what I needed to graduate so that I can go into the police department. But I mean, I went to school on Saturdays, in the summertime. It
Oh
was
yeah.
like exhausting, but I had gone to New Paltz College for the first 2 years after high school. So I got the partying out then. I was like, all right, we
Okay.
gotta we gotta clean up here and
Yeah.
life is gonna hit me real quick. I gotta get a job. So
So
yeah.
what year did you get in the academy?
I was hired July 1st to 2002.
2000. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, a long time ago. It feels like a long time ago.
Well, yeah, and that was like what, a year after 9/11. So, and
Yeah.
we'll talk about that a little bit later. But okay, now you're going to be a cop. What did your parents say? Did you announce to them as like, do they know like all along this is something that you were interested in, you're going to do, or did you shock them, or what did that look like?
Yeah, no, I was kind of like a lost puppy, just not really sure for a long time what I wanted to do. I mean, growing up, it was like, I'm going to be an archaeologist. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be, like, it depended on the day of the week where what I wanted to do. So when I went to college, I didn't have a direction. I just took core classes. I didn't really have
Sure.
a major. And one day I'm hanging out with a buddy of mine and we're just sitting there and he's like, you should be a cop in the city. And he was from Brooklyn. And I'm like, that's a good idea. I got to get out of here. So that was it. I stayed there for like the rest of the summer and, I was working. So I was, making extra cash waitressing or whatever. And I'm like, I'm going to go to John Jay and clean up my act and go home. So I came home and my parents were like, what's going on? I'm like, I'm gonna be a cop in the city. And my father, who was a homicide detective at the time, he retired a little before 9/11.
Okay.
He was like, are you crazy? You don't want to do that job. You don't want to do that job. But growing up with him being on the job, he worked what was called the 9 squad charts. He had like 2 days of midnights, 2 days of day tours, and like a
Oh,
day of 4 to 12, which is 3 to 11:30 at
oh,
night.
that's brutal.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like there was like a 70% divorce rate or something
Oh,
ridiculous because people just couldn't. I remember growing up and it was like we would have to be in the basement because my dad was sleeping and we had to be
right.
quiet all day long so that he was able to sleep because, he's got to be able to function at work. It was the 80s and the 90s, the crack wars and stuff. It
Oh,
was just
yeah.
crazy. So like so I guess he thought of it like that, like because the family life is very hard,
Yeah.
to have kids and especially being like a female as the mom and the concern I guess was for the safety and stuff, but I was determined. I said no, this is I think I really want to do this. So I kind of steered off a little bit when I started taking law classes because I was fascinated by the law. The penal law, constitutional law, I loved it. So I started taking heavy law classes, and but then I'm like, no, I can't be reading case law for the rest of my life. I'm gonna stick with the cop thing. So,
Gotcha. Now,
but they backed me up. They were okay with it
oh, okay. Very
eventually.
good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I
They were
mean,
supportive.
you're used to the police thing, obviously dad's a cop, so you it absorbs you. You kind of get sucked into that culture. So it's not super surprising, I guess, that, you kind of went that direction. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I have one of each. They
And
didn't do the police thing there.
yeah, that was my next question. Yeah, did they get bit by the
No.
police bug?
No, I mean, I was like I had like a bumper sticker on my car when I was 17, like bad cop, no donut. I wasn't really all about the police department, which, my father was thrilled with. Like, seriously, this is the bumper sticker. He's like, you're gonna get pulled over. I'm like, you know, the rebellious nature of a teenager. So, but no, they didn't go that route.
That's not so bad. I could think of a lot worse bumper stickers. So that's pretty tame, I think, in today's world. That's pretty tame. So that's okay. Well, let me ask you this. I just kind of popped in my head. What if one of your kids said, "Hey, Ma, I want to be a cop"?
Yeah, I mean, it, I that's a tough question. I
It
mean,
is.
I'm in Florida now, so I feel like the cops have the backing of, the mayors and the governor, and the,
Yeah,
the
it
the
feels like
support
that.
system that you
Yeah.
need is like there. So if it was down here, I mean, I would probably be like all over them with like tactics and stuff, because sometimes, you drive by, or, you watch the real life cop shows or whatever, and I'm like, oh gosh, those tactics are so bad. Somebody, how are they not getting hurt right now? So I would probably be like stalking them, and like, you exhibited bad tactics, and that's not how you do that. But if it was New York City, I would probably say maybe you should try another department, because as much as I love the NYPD, the support from the community, from Albany, from, it's not really there. It's
Right.
good to question enforcement and law enforcement, and you need to be held accountable. I
Absolutely.
100% agree with that.
Yes.
However, when you're nitpicking details, and,
Oh,
from the safety of your office, determining what was right or wrong when a cop was fighting for his life, that's not really, you're not putting cops in a fair position, and it makes them hesitate. And I saw that a lot later on in my career.
yep.
I saw cops hesitating because they were scared to take action, and that leads to you getting hurt.
What I have seen, like the tail end of my career, I retired in 20, and seeing just like watching on TV or YouTube or whatever, cops are hesitant to touch people now.
Yes.
If you don't go
Yes.
hands on, I mean, it could literally kill you. Yeah, it
Yeah.
just that's so disturbing, and hesitation will kill you. There's no doubt about it. Just that fraction of a second has made a huge difference. I know it has in my life. I'm sure it has in yours too. It's like any cop in any big city USA, if you're on the street and you're actually arresting bad guys on the regular, you know, you have to you have to be in control. You cannot have that hesitation. Once you start like double and triple and quadruple overthinking stuff and whatever, that's a slippery slope, and cops are just going to get hurt. And I think it's already starting to happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. When we had the George Floyd riots, I had to go for disorder control retraining, which is basically like how you handle the riot, because
Yeah.
I had like over 15 years on, and so an old timer, you had to get retraining. So me and my friend go. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. So when in the academy, I had been taught that when you're in a riot or whatever, you make like an X pattern with your baton. And,
You're right.
if somebody's using force against you, you can use the level of force, one up, and all that stuff. And I go to this retraining, and they're telling us, how to hold the baton, and, the one step, and the get back, and the formations, and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay, I raised my hand. I'm like, at what point, what's the level of force we can use where we can start swinging and getting these people back? Because the tactics that they use are so unfair, like what they're using with the nails, and the tear gas and all this stuff. Like, this is like a totally different level that I've
Right.
ever experienced before. When is the level of force allowed to be used where I can just start, a punch to the face? Like, what do we got going on? And he's like, no, you cannot swing your baton. And I'm like, excuse me?
Ah,
So I
see,
just
we
got to
were
sit
not
there and
taught
be a
that.
punching
No,
bag. Like, I don't. So I started taking like Krav Maga classes and stuff because I'm
sure.
like, this is not a fair fight anymore. Like I was never taught you kind of got to like get beat up first before you can fight back. I'm like, you know, you take one swing to the head and if it hits you right, you're done.
Oh,
You're knocked out.
absolutely. Yep.
So I'm like, this is so I saw that it was just it wasn't necessarily just the cops hesitating because they were scared. In general, I think the cops are hesitating because they don't want to be on the 5 o'clock news
Yep.
that, they shot some, unarmed person and,
Right.
used excessive force. So that I think like with the media and stuff is
I
it's a
remember
problem.
I was in larger and smaller skirmishes. They were technically riots. And what I remember from my academy days,
Nonviolent protests. Yeah.
yes, and we had retraining, but as a boss, the things that really stuck in my head is if you're trying to redirect people, have an avenue for them to get out. I see, I'd roll up on, a scene where you'd have like 50, 60 people in a mob, and maybe like 10 cops, and they're trying to like push them back. And I'm like, dude, you're pushing them back into like a building that's closed. How
Yeah.
about that
Yeah.
street that's open, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want to do if there's cops listening, don't jump into the crowd and arrest that one guy because you don't want to
Yes.
be swallowed up into that crowd and it'll happen in a blink of an eye. Yeah, he's saying X, Y, or Z. Maybe he threw a bottle at you, whatever. Boy, you got to have some self-control. Because your first instinct is like, yeah, I'm slapping cuffs on you. You're going to jail. But a lot of times you cannot do it.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, there are some points where I wrote about this a lot in my book where there was when I was a cop where if somebody disrespected the uniform and was like F you or F you pigs or whatever and like people looking, it's like you have to protect the integrity of the shield and you have to protect the integrity of the uniform because if the public sees that you can like pour water over the cop's head as they're walking away and they get away with it, it just leads to more disorder.
Right.
But
Yeah,
then you kind of have to like, there were some situations where we would have like street parties where you would have, like the house party that spills into the street of like 1,000 plus people.
right.
And you're like, your mouth is your most important tool. And it's like, hey guys, how's it going? You have a good time? Everything was good. You had a great, yeah, you guys look awesome. I love your dress. You look fantastic. Do me a favor. We got to clear this out. I don't mean to be a jerk. I know you guys want to keep drinking, but you got to head out of here. And you kind of like start on the outskirts and like kind of talk your way into
Yeah.
dispersing and it's an art and I think it's lost maybe on the younger and I feel like an
I
old
think,
person saying this but I think with the phones and the everybody's like this on
yes,
the phone the ability to like kind of like schmooze people and BS people
exactly.
into compliance has been a lost art and it the police themselves suffer for it.
Yeah, you have to pick your battles. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about that. Yeah, it's like, okay, I'm outnumbered 1,000 to 1 here. Do I really want to start aggravating, but I mean, you know what it's like. Yeah, you've worked with some people that, they can make Gandhi a no person. They can make Mother
Yeah.
Teresa a fighter. You're just
Yeah.
like, oh, just the freaking mouth. It's like, again, it's the gift of gab. You got to pick your
Yeah.
battles. And yeah, I mean, there's 100%. Yeah, it just, I would get to a scene and it's like, okay, why is this person under arrest? And it was like, yeah, the sergeant was FTR. I'm like, I remember from like, oh, failure to recognize. Just like you said, it's like they disrespected the badge or the uniform or whatever, and it's like FTR sergeant. I'm like, lock them up. I got no
Yeah.
problem because all their little buddies are watching, and like you said, and this will escalate so fast. It's like if you had a crowd and you had enough cops, it's like, who are we going to arrest? The one with the biggest mouth, the one that's, just running and running their freaking mouth. And it's like, you know what? Yeah, they're a tough guy now. And then, the cuffs go on and then they're crying like little girls and,
Yeah.
shut up. Uh,
Yeah, everybody's a tough guy till the handcuffs come out and then things
oh,
get
no
really
doubt
interesting.
about it.
Yeah.
All right. So you came on the department post 9/11. How big of a presence was it for you and, the other new coppers that weren't on the job yet when the terrorist attack occurred?
I feel it's interesting, especially moving to Florida afterwards. 9/11 is kind of like not a thing for people who, I guess, I mean, and I'm sure it's probably the same for DC and in Shanksville, but in New York City, it was a traumatic. I've never
Oh yeah.
experienced anything in the city of like people were actually nice to each other. Like they would let you go and there was no honking horns and there wasn't like F you in the finger for like 3 solid days after 9/11, which is like unprecedented in New York City of
Yeah,
like people
and
being
the crime
considerate to
rate
your
just,
people.
tanked. There was almost no crime.
Yeah, there was nothing because I think people were in literal shock at what had happened,
Right.
and it was just a horrible thing. So when we came on, I went right into the subway after I graduated the academy. Much to my dismay, I didn't really want to work in the subway, but you get put where the department needs you to go, and
Yep.
that's where I got sent. So, a little spoke on the wheel. But when we went down there, it was still, even though it was a year and a half later, it was still a major thing on people's minds. I mean, in the subway, we had overtime posts at all of the tunnels where you had to sit there to make sure that nobody was going to go into the tunnel and,
Mm.
potentially put a bomb in there. And, there was suspicious package calls and suspicious substance calls. It was like people were so hypersensitive to it. I had a job with there was like a suspicious substance on the subway car, and I get there and I look and it's like this white powdery substance or whatever, and you think like the anthrax attacks and all that
Oh
stuff, and I'm
yeah.
looking at it, I'm like, a whole subway car full of probably like 200 people, the way that you cram onto a subway, just came off and nobody's hurt, so I don't
Yeah,
really
they're
think
not
this is.
dropping like flies. Yeah.
Yeah, like if we had a couple of dead people, I would be like, this might be something. So, but as a rookie cop, I'm like, I'm not making that call. So I call my
Sure.
boss over and she shows up and she looks at it and she's like, that shit is comet. Get this train moving. Like, look, like so it was like the old timers that I work with, which were a lot. I mean, when I came on, everybody had 10, 15 plus years on. I think the sense was like the cops were tired. I feel like they had just been worked to the bone and were still trying
Okay.
to recover from the exhaustion. And I mean, it wasn't like I think it was an important, a sort of hazing type of a process where you kind of were like ignored as a rookie. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
it was good because it made you humble and it made you respect the way that things were done and it made you learn because if what I saw a lot later on in my career was the rookies would come on, they'd be like, I know how to handle everything. You can't tell me anything. And it was like, okay, good luck.
Yeah.
You the art of gaining wisdom is admitting you know nothing. So it was good for us because we learned from the old timers. It was like just shut up, keep your mouth shut, and just watch what we do. And I think for them living through that whole thing, I didn't feel like they held it against us at all, but I felt like the exhaustion of that entire event was still there a year and a half later.
Okay. Now, when you were in the academy, did they have like a big presentation about it, like incident command or, you know, any like, did they show a lot of videos or how did the academy staff present that or handle it?
I don't remember them having any videos. I know they would talk about, being down at the pile and,
Yeah.
having to do the bucket brigade and stuff like that. But that was, I mean, it might have been like a passing mention. It wasn't like
So they didn't have like a
anything.
block of instruction just, going through that.
No, if anything, it was like just the terrorism aspect of it, of
Mm,
like the training to show you
yeah.
this is what you're looking for. But the cops themselves, as far as like personal experiences, I mean, that's kind of like how we handle things, right? You don't really,
Yeah,
you
that's
kind of
true.
don't talk, you talk about the funny stuff. We don't really talk about the actual
Yeah.
traumatizing stuff that we don't. And if we do, we turn into a funny thing. It's
Absolutely.
never,
And the more horrible it is, the funnier we're going to try to make it. That's just the way.
yeah,
That's
yeah. But
cop
I
life.
think, yeah, like 9/11, I think was so horrible that
Yeah.
there was no being able to
Oof.
make that like a
No.
humorous thing. It was like, it was just disgusting what was done. So I don't remember except for major terrorism training. I mean, I remember we went for like, we had to have the hazmat suit training in the
Okay.
subway. So I'd have to go to training like every 6 months or once a year, whatever it was, to you put your hazmat suit on and they have the subway cars and if there's a gas and this is what you do and I'm like um you know where's my gun belt going, like you're sending me in here with like this ridiculous gas mask that like mace is the only thing this thing filters, so if there's anything else I'm gonna be dead. I'm like,
Right.
I signed up to chase guys with guns. I didn't realize I signed up to go into hot zones with all these toxic chemicals that are supposedly going to affect the subway system. But it was a real fear, it was a real possibility, and they trained us
Sure.
for it and we were ready to handle it.
Yeah.
But
Well,
Yeah.
it's you just sparked a memory that's funny to me because we got these hazmat suits and they're military surplus. We used to get like
Yeah.
military surplus stuff.
Yeah.
And the captain is all excited. She's like, "Oh, look what we got. We got these hazmat suits, blah blah." And one of my fellow sergeants it was the guy that was either in the Air Force or the Army or the Marines. I don't know. I worked with a lot of vets, and they're like, "Ma'am, you need a self-contained breathing apparatus with this. If one of our cops just wears this, they're gonna suffocate." And she's like, "What?" Yeah, they're sending us stuff. If we put it on, we're gonna be dead in like 5 minutes. And that's without anthrax or any like scary,
Yeah.
spooky stuff. Just putting it on. I'm like, this is so Milwaukee Police Department. It's like, oh look, we got something free from the guy. All right, let's take it. It's like, don't think about training or hey, is there another piece to this? I don't know, like an oxygen tank or something. That might be a good idea, guys. And it's like, oh, but anyways.
Yeah, yeah. The military guys definitely helped us out because they were like, these are not the right filters for this mask.
Right,
You need to have like
exactly.
the big, so we ended up getting the bigger ones, and it was like so ridiculously heavy to protect from all that stuff that you would like walk around with your head like this. And I'm like, this is, first of all, I'm dripping set in this Tyvek suit. You're like duct
Oh,
taping the,
yep.
I'm like, this is, and then the decon. I mean, I don't know how you felt, but like being a girl, I'm like, there is no way this whole decon thing is going to fly for me because you have to like completely undress in like a tent. And I'm like, this is like, do we have like a separate area for the girls? Because like, I don't know about this. Like, like stripping down in front of all of these people is not exactly my idea of a good time after,
Yeah,
going
it's
through a
like,
zone.
hey, we're all close, but I don't want to be that close.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah, the
funny.
academy was bad enough having to shower next to other females, but having to do this next to dudes too, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I had a bird's eye view of what it would be like to be a female on the job because my first partner on the job was female. And it's funny because, we would, obviously you talk about everything. It was great having a partner in the squad that you actually liked and you got along with, you're like in similar life situations, blah, blah, blah. And I remember I don't know how the conversation started, but we're talking about underwear. Like your mom says, always wear clean underwear in case you get into an accident. Yeah. And she said, yeah, for us, she says, I'll never wear a thong to work. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, you goddamn perverts are going to, I'll never hear the end of it. If I have to take my pants off for whatever reason, I'm wearing a freaking thong. She said, yeah, I'll be known as thong girl or whatever. Or God forbid I get shot. And she said, yeah, is she okay? Oh, look what she's wearing.
Yeah.
I know you guys. You're all perverts. You're all like, all right, all right, all right.
She's 100% correct. That
Yeah.
is there, the ball busting is relentless, I guess,
Oh
in
yeah.
any police department, and there is no recovering from the,
No.
you got to have a real thing. I think you have to have a thicker skin with the guys you work with than the public on the street.
Yes,
Because it's like
I
it's
totally agree.
brutal. Yeah.
So so kind of circling back a little bit to 9/11, were the cops that obviously went through it, the vets, that went through all that stuff. Did they consider you new guys like less of a cop because you didn't go through that? Or was that even a thing?
No, I never felt that way. I mean, I
Okay.
think later on in my career, there were like a couple of guys who were like, yeah, you weren't on a 9/11, you're a rookie type of a thing, but it was very few and far between.
Okay.
I think it united them in a separate way, but they didn't make us feel less because we weren't in 9/11. We're still a rookie. We got like the treatment of like, you're a rookie, you
Sure.
know nothing, but it wasn't like added on because we weren't there for 9/11. Because I guess if you look at it like, the potential for another terrorist attack was still high. Everybody assumed we were going to be attacked again. So it was kind
Yeah.
of like a mutual respect. Like, they were on the job not anticipating that. And yet we came on after the job when it had already happened and we knew it could happen again. So
Okay. That
it
makes
was,
sense.
yeah.
All right. Now, circling back real quick, I jump around here, so bear with me. When you were in the
No
academy, I
worries.
remember I was listening to your interview with Vic. You said you had some bag that was like a zillion pounds that you had to lug around. What was in that bag?
Oh, I hated that bag. That bag, it was like a giant duffel bag. It was this long, and like this wide. And in there we had the patrol guide, which is all the procedures in the police
Mhm.
department. And when I was a cop, it was like this big.
It's
I
like the
mean,
phone book.
not even
Yep,
exaggerating. Yeah.
absolutely. We had the
And it
same.
was like, yeah, the instructors are like, you see why it's this big? Because that's how many times things got messed up
Yeah,
and effed up.
somebody
And
screwed
so,
up. Yep.
yeah. So
Every
you
new
can thank all the
rule, every new,
cops
yep.
that,
Every new
so it was,
SOP, every new rule. Yeah, it's like,
yeah. And I'm sure it's like double the size now from, that was 20 years ago. But so we had that in there. You had to have your gym clothes because you had to change for, you had gym every day. So you had to change
right,
for gym. You had to have your towel in there and, your soap and stuff. You had your equipment, you had your baton or your nightstick, you had your handcuffs, your gun belt, which we didn't have guns, but we had to have the
right.
gun belt. You didn't
Yep,
get the guns till the end. But and then you had your regular books for all your other classes. You had law classes and,
yep.
like the behavioral science where they taught you how to like talk to people and de-escalate situations and stuff. So it was just filled with all kinds of books and all your equipment. And we didn't have lockers in that academy. So
Oh,
you had
see,
to
we
carry
did.
it.
We had lockers,
Oh,
so that was
you
great.
kept it there? Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I did not have the ginormous bag to lug around. I was very happy about that. Yes.
Yeah, the new guys don't either, but you carry that thing with you from classroom to classroom, up and down the stairs. And and back then we didn't drive to the academy. There's no parking in Manhattan unless you want to pay like $1,000. So we all took the subway. So we were subway to the Long
Oh,
Island Railroad. So we're lugging that thing.
yeah.
And like I remember seeing my pants from the academy because you're in a police uniform with a gray shirt instead of a blue shirt, and the sides of your pants are completely worn out from like just dragging
Oh
the
my
thing. I mean,
gosh.
I still have calluses underneath my fingers from that stupid bag. It was
Oh,
like I
that's
just wanted
funny.
to burn that thing, but it was such a great bag. It was so well made that I ended up using it for like storage and stuff. I still I still have it in the attic because it's a good heavy canvas bag. So, but yeah,
Oh,
that was the gear that was in there. It was
all
everything that
right.
you needed.
Yeah, I was just curious. That's funny. Now, you graduated from the academy, you went straight to being a transit cop, correct?
Yes.
Now, could you explain to us what a transit cop is?
So the subway system in New York City is divided into, instead of precincts, they call them transit districts. So you have, and I don't know how many there are, Manhattan, the Bronx. There's like two in Queens, a couple in Brooklyn, and then I think one on Staten Island. So I was assigned to District 20, which is Queens North, and then a couple of the subway lines that go into the southern part of Queens into Brooklyn, and then one of them went to Randall's Island, which is the island in between Manhattan and Queens. So I was assigned to the entire area, which was, you know what, in hindsight, it was good because it taught you tactics because I had a partner, but a lot of the time you were alone. So
Yeah.
you had to kind of learn how to take care of yourself. And normally in the NYPD, you have a partner, like the sector cars, the police
Mm,
patrol cars, everybody, including the bosses. It's very rare for a boss to drive himself. He usually
wow.
has a driver. Everybody has a partner. Um, so that was it was a different type of policing.
That makes sense. Now, I think it's in your book or you're talking about it with Vic, a one-eyed guy with a big ball. What's that story?
Oh, this poor man. I mean, he was old then, so I don't know, but if he's still around. But yeah, this guy, he was a homeless guy, and in the subways, you have your homeless people that kind of have their area. They have their bench
Sure.
or they have their spot on a particular train, that's their subway car. That's their bench, that's their entranceway that they kind of like sleep in or whatever, and that's where they live. So this guy had a bench at one of the stations on Hillside Avenue, and we would get occasionally calls for him. So you go over to him, and well, they smell so bad. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's like really just absolutely disgusting. I mean, some of them wouldn't wear shoes and you'd see the toenails that were like
Ah,
longer than my finger, just like
yep.
brutal. But this particular guy, I don't know how it happened. I should have asked him, but I didn't want to make him feel bad, but he was missing an eyeball. And however it fell out, it kind of just like, I guess, popped out because the eye socket was still open.
Oh,
So whatever the fluid is that, lubricates your eyeball or
yeah.
whatever's going on in there, it would just ooze down his face. So it was kind of like, it was like a snot kind of like just
Oh,
hanging from his eyeball all the time. And I'm like, oh, this poor guy. And then, you walk over to him, and in the summertime, they would wear like shorts, or, in the winter, even you could see it with sweatpants. He had a major testicular issue where he had like a nut that was the size of like a basketball. It was huge. And it would just, it would, I mean, it must have been so painful for this guy. It was just
Oh,
so big and it would like kind of hang out of the bottom of the shorts and stuff. And it was like,
oh.
oh, I gotta go deal with this guy again. And I mean, I don't even remember what his name was, but he just, it was like, I'm not going anywhere. And it was like, you didn't lock him up. You weren't going to bring
Oh,
that
yeah.
back to the precinct.
Look at
My
the
first
medical
arrest
clearance.
was,
Good luck with that.
you're never, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I got spoken to. My first arrest was a homeless guy because, they panhandle and panhandling or asking for money is illegal on the subway. And I'm like, I remember he came in and I'm like, come on off. And I locked him up because I'm like, I made my first arrest. Like your first arrest when you're a cop is kind of a big deal. You like,
Right.
it's exciting. You think you're doing your job and stuff. And I bring it to, and the lieutenant's like, what the F did you bring into my station house? That guy might have TB. Now we're all
Oh,
infected. He's
yeah.
coughing all over the place. And I'm sorry. I thought I did a good job. I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, I mean, they're just, they're kind of just nomads. They roam the subway system, and a lot of them have mental issues. Some of them are kind of cool. Some of them get very violent, and you hope that it just goes smoothly and they just leave and you don't have to have an issue. But the last thing you want to do is lock them up.
Yep. Absolutely. So tell me about the blackout. I think that happened when you were working in transit, right?
Yeah, that was I think 2003. I was in the subway for like a year. I think it was the summertime, it was like August. And I worked 4 to 12, so it's 3 to 11:30 at night was the tour.
Okay.
Which is like my favorite tour. That's just working the nights is the best. So that day I was assigned to drive the sergeant, which is very unusual for rookies. Like once in a while, the sergeant would take out one of the new cops
Yeah.
just to drive around and show them like this is the different stations, because you wouldn't always man every single station. You had a cop at the busy stations, but so you would like learn your way around, and just switch it up a little bit. So that day, luckily, I was driving the boss, and I'm in he's like just hang out a little bit because he had his administrative work to do. He's like just go
Yeah.
in the muster room and hang out. So I go in there and I'm like, let me grab a soda. So I throw the money into the machine and I hit the button and nothing happens. And I'm like, what the hell? So I hit all the buttons, nothing's happening. So, because the cops are like, they get angry at the machine. So they always tape signs. I think it's citywide. Every precinct in the vending machine has a sign, do not shake the machine because
Yeah.
cops do it all the time. And I'm
Yes.
like, I ripped the sign off. I'm like, this thing just stole my $2. Give me my soda. I'm so thirsty and it's not working. And I'm like, what is going on here? And like and then I look at the machine next to it, the lights off. I'm like, what? So I look outside and the hallway ended with two glass doors that led onto the station. The transit districts are in the subway. So like
Mm,
it looks out onto the platform
yeah.
and it was pitch black out there. And I had kind of grown up, my mom was a city teacher, so I would go to school with her a lot and we took the subways and the train. So I kind of grew up knowing and being familiar with the subway, and I
Yeah.
had never seen it pitch black before. I mean, like I don't even remember there being emergency lights on. And I'm like, what is going on out there? So I go over to the desk and it's just complete chaos. The phones are ringing and whatever. So the precincts all have generators. So that's why we had energy, but I guess the
Right.
vending machines weren't hooked up to those to to those things because I'm like, I'm looking for the club guy to find out like where I want my money back. This thing just stole the thing, but they kept my $2 on that one because I think the vending machines weren't hooked up to it. They didn't have the power, and that's why it didn't give me my soda, or it was habitually broken. But in any case, so they were like, you have a system-wide blackout. And we didn't realize then that it was like the whole Northeast had just
Holy cow.
everybody had lost power because we're underground. We don't know what's going over
Right.
topside. So my boss is like, all right, we got to evacuate people from the subways. And I'm thinking to myself, it's August. The subways
Oh.
in the city get to be 110, 120 degrees
Oh,
easy. I
yeah.
mean, it's just brutal down there. And if the trains don't have power, they don't have air conditioning. And there
Oh,
are millions of people that ride these subways. This is going to be bad. Like, we're going to have people
right.
passing out. Like, there's going to be
Oh,
aides all over the place.
absolutely.
Plus, like the babies and the kids and whatever. And it was
Yeah.
like rush hour, it's like 3:30.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
like, this is going to be bad. So we went out and we went into the tunnels. I don't really remember how we figured out what stations, but we just went from like station to station. We would go down into the tunnel and we would walk along the tunnel. And I had like my flashlight that was from the academy that you didn't really need to use too much in transit because the subways are lit.
Oh, okay.
And so I hadn't really ever checked the batteries on the thing. So I'm like, using the flashlight to make my way to the tunnel. And you just see this huge subway car just sitting there silent. And as I'm like walking down there, I'm like, what's going to happen when the power goes back on and the engineer who was driving the train realizes he forgot to put the brake on and this thing starts barreling towards us and just mows us down and we're flattened
Yeah.
underneath it. Like, like, what's the protocol here? Like, is there a warning light that goes on, like a Jurassic Park thing that like it beeps red, like the power's about to go back on, or are we just going to get flattened? So we open up, my boss goes up, he opens up the door and, we start leading people back and forth. And I'm like, everybody hold hands and follow me. And I grab the person I grab their hand and I lead them back into the station. And
Yeah.
there's like a little emergency staircase up and, they make their way out. And then I walk back and eventually the flashlight batteries died. So I mean, we had little flip phones back then. So the light from the flip phone, which is like hardly anything, was illuminating the way of these poor people. And I'm like, this is just a disaster. But it was just hot and brutal. And I remember that first subway, we emptied out and a couple of the guys went through and they made sure like everybody was off the train. And, we had no aids by that, it was just the first train. So it wasn't too bad. So everybody was off the train and we go back to the station, we go topside and, my boss is calling to find out like what other stations are affected and where are the
Yeah.
other trains. And I'm like, dude, I gotta go wash my face. I am just a sweaty, disgusting mess. So there was a bar that was open. And you do not in the NYPD go into a bar in uniform unless there is a 911 call. And even
Yeah.
then, there's like a protocol to say, like, you're going into an establishment that sells alcohol. And I'm like, I do not care. I walked into this bar. I'm like, I don't care. I'm not putting it over. And I'm like, I'm using your bathroom. And I just walked in the back and I'm like washing my face, like just covered in sweat and the soot from the subway and it's just filth. And as I'm walking out, the bartender's like, you want a beer? And I'm like,
Yes,
can't
I
I
do,
can't
but
drink.
well, yeah, of course I
I'll be back
do,
later.
but yeah.
It's like bad timing. It's too bad it's not the end. So yeah, so that was, I mean, after that we were on like 12-hour tours, which is the other wonderful thing about the police department that people don't understand is like when there's a major catastrophe, the job will put you on 12-hour
Right.
tours and that's it. And it's, 5 to 5 or 7 to 7. And it's like, we don't really care what your family situation is or babysitting. And,
Right.
usually sometimes you'll have two cops that get married and it's like, who's going to watch the kids? So luckily for me, I was single at the time and it was like, I didn't have that complication, but it was 12-hour tours for, no days off for until the disaster is over. But I remember I was assigned to stations and you would just stand at the subway entrance because there's no lights downstairs, nobody's down there, so you just hang out upstairs for like 12 hours just standing there just bored out of your
Oh,
mind. And you'd see the marked cars go flying by with the sirens on and stuff and
yeah.
I'm like, that's what I want to be doing. So I started putting in for transfers and stuff and I think in 2004 in April I was transferred to a Queens precinct.
Very good. Now, in your book, you go over, obviously when you went topside and you're working, would you guys call them radio cars, right? Or what do you call a squad car?
Yeah, it's RMP,
What's
Radio
our?
Motor Patrol. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
That's the
yeah,
marked police car. Yeah.
okay, yeah. But you got to do some like undercover prostitution, like stings. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that was fun.
Could you
Yeah.
tell? You have one story in there. I like that's good. You want to just kind of go over that real quick?
Yeah, sure. So the prostitution scams were done because there was a quality of life issue. You didn't want to have prostitutes running around, Times Square and stuff. So every precinct that had some type of prostitution complaint, like 911 or 311 complaints, so we would have to do the prostitution operations, which was the girls in the precinct would, one or two would dress up like hookers and go on the
Yep.
corner and you'd have a whole setup. So one time I'm out there and I'm training a new girl and I had been doing it for a while. This wasn't necessarily new to me. It was kind of like a boring thing. I'm like, here I am with these stupid heels again. And, it kind of got like, oh, here we go again. But, so, and that in and of itself is the danger of policing is that you get bored. So we had a Tahoe pull up and, I had gone over the tactics with her and how you do stuff or whatever. So they pull up and they start talking to me and they were very familiar with the logo of talking to a prostitute, which got me worried because I was like, okay, I know some of it, the NYPD gives you like a book with like, the terms and you study it so that you kind of know. I'm like, I'm studying how to be
You
a
go to
hooker. This is
yeah, it's hooker school. All right.
yeah. Well, I don't know what happened to me, but here I am. But yeah. So I kind of like I recognized the terms that they were using from it, but I'm like, okay, so they were I got a bad feeling from them immediately as soon as they pulled up, which I guess as a cop, it's kind of like an inherent thing that you just kind of,
Yep.
you don't have there's no articulable explanation for it. You just have a gut feeling something's not right, you know? So I'm like, something's wrong with these dudes. They're talking funny, you know, they're just, the passenger's not talking. He's just staring at me. So I make the deal with them and they drive to the predetermined area where I was going to get into the car, which was really the takedown area. And I said to the girl that I was with, like, yo, call those guys and just tell them these are real perps. Something's up here. I don't know what it is, but just when you do the takedown, just use extra caution because something's wrong. So I walk to the corner and I'm giving the signal and the takedown's not happening. And I'm like, what's going on? And so I turn the corner because I got to make it look good. And, you know, I don't want these guys to just drive away because I know something's up. And I see the Tahoe and it's sitting there and the engine's running. And I see them, you know, the passengers looking at me in a side view mirror. And I'm just, you know, walking real slow. And I turn back and I see the girl that I'm with go running across the street. And I'm like, what the hell is she doing? Like,
Yeah.
she's not supposed to leave me. Like, and I mean, after this incident, like we didn't have a Kel, which was like the microphone. We didn't have
Yeah.
that at the time. I didn't have a weapon on me. Like, forget
Yeah.
about
You have
guns. I didn't have a knife. I had nothing.
nothing. Yep.
I had my
Absolutely.
fist and like the 6-inch heels that I could barely walk in. Like that was my single white female weapon that I had. And I'm like, this is bad. Like I just got like a knot in my stomach and I just felt like nauseous. I'm like, oh God, here we go. So I'm walking down the street and I get to the car and the perp in the passenger seat's yelling at me, yo, get in, B, what are you doing? And I'm like, you know, my girl's got to call daddy and, you know, make sure it's okay that I'm not going to be on the corner for a while. I don't know if he's going to be happy about the price that we agreed to or whatever. You know, I just got to make sure he knows that I'm not here. I'm just trying to make up any excuse to obviously not get in this car.
Right.
But I'm like, this is a desolate road. Where are my guys? Like, they're
Yeah.
supposed to be surrounding this car right now. I'm by myself. I'm like, I'm gonna get kidnapped and disappeared, and that's gonna be the end of it.
Uh,
And so all of a sudden, like when you know, it was probably like a minute. It was probably no time at all, but it felt like six
it feels
years.
like forever. Yep.
It feels like forever, but
Yep.
the lights come on and all the cars swarm, and it was like, you know, everybody just comes running out of the car towards the Tahoe. So I kind of like back up, but I'm still trying to look because I'm thinking if these guys go reach for guns, I got to give my guys a heads up that they're pulling guns out because that was what I was thinking. Like these
Sure.
are legit perps, they have guns. So I'm like sitting there, no vest, no nothing. And I'm
Yeah. You
like,
don't
oh,
have, yeah.
please don't pull a gun. Like I'm gonna get caught in a crossfire here and I'm gonna get hit by friendly fire. Like this is night is not gonna go well for me. You know, like I need a beer right now. This is horrible. So yeah, so the takedown went down well or whatever. And it turned out that it was actually hysterical that my ghost had like spilled coffee and was like cleaning it up or whatever. And
Oh.
while he was cleaning it up, his phone dropped. So we couldn't find the phone. And
Oh.
it was like, you know, of course, like it was hours of like, you know, okay, we got one, we got another one, we got another one. And then when the bad guys show up, chaos happens. And you know,
Right.
so they couldn't give the signal to the other guys because they, you know, weren't paying attention because they didn't see the signal. I'm like, you bastards, man. I'm like down here by myself. But it ended up that we go back to the precinct and they had like bulletproof vests and they had zip ties and a change of
Ooh.
clothes. And so, you know, they were up to something that night. I didn't get to know what happened at the end of it. I know like the squad was going to talk to them and everything, and
Yeah.
they were going through flyers and stuff. And but it's interesting because you never know, especially when you get make like a gun collar, like what did you just prevent, interrupt,
Oh,
stop from
absolutely.
happening,
Yes.
you know? And just because like these idiots were like, I'm gonna go pick up a prostitute and have some fun before we go and do so, or maybe that was meant for me. I have
Yeah.
no idea, you know, I
Who
mean,
knows?
it could have
Yeah.
been, but you know, or just another prostitute who could have been, you know, like abducted. So it was interesting, but I'm like, yeah, no more coffee. No, the ghost is not allowed to have coffee anymore after this. This is no
Yeah.
fun.
We would do the same thing in Milwaukee because, prostitution was a 24/7, business. And, at first we would have like younger guys, go pick up prostitutes. So we'd get them off the street. Then we'd put
Right.
our girls on the street, you know.
Right, right. Yeah.
And, and it never, we'd have just a van full of, arrestees, going to the
Yeah,
district. And after a while, because of like human trafficking and all that, we'd have social workers there. So it wasn't just arresting prostitutes. It's like, okay, are you a part of human trafficking? Then it just got
right,
to the point, it was like, we're just spinning our wheels now. It's like, the prostitutes are victims now. They're not, suspects. And the waters got very murky And, from the time that I started doing this, where it was very clear cut, it's like, yeah, she's a hooker, she needs to go to jail, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. But when I'd have my girls out there, it, some of them were dressed like prostitutes. Some of them would just wear like a sweatshirt and jeans, and they were still getting proposition.
Yeah.
And I'm just shocked by some of the Johns because, like, one guy had his baby with him in a car seat. And she's like,
Horrible.
"Hey, Sarge, this is really sick." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"What?" And she tells me, and I'm like, "What am I gonna do with this?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, how stupid are you? Really? You're trying to pick up a hooker with your, 6-month-old in the car seat behind you. I
Yeah.
just, it just blows your mind, And then another guy, he owned like two or three huge Greek restaurants in the city, and he was going to the bank to make a deposit. I mean, he had a bank bag with, I don't know, $6,000-7,000 in it on the front seat.
Oh my God. Well, at least you know he had the money to pay the pros. That's
Oh
good.
yeah, but I'm just like, you are so lucky this was a cop and not a real
Yeah.
prostitute. I said, they would happily relieve you of your
Yeah.
worldly possessions. If they see 7 grand in cash laying on the seat, yeah, bad things are going to happen to you. And then I'd always tell these guys, I'm like, hey, you're disgusting because, you live in the suburbs, you're doing this, then you're going home to your wives, and it's
Yeah.
just like, ew.
Bringing home disease.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's like, you couldn't notice that my girls are clean, they don't smell bad, and look at their teeth. They're not missing teeth. They don't have a tooth sticking out here and out there. Yeah, people, it's not like Pretty Woman. Yeah, it's nothing
I
like
used
that.
to actually, I used black eyeliner and I would black
Yes.
out a few teeth so that
Now
I
that's
would
good. I
fit
like
into the
that.
role better. So, because it's true, like you want to look, I mean, me and this one girl, we were just like, we would just look so skanky. And it was like, we got like 8 guys in an hour. I'm like, this is just, we weren't even like really set up to take the next one down. And it was, but it's true. You get these guys and they're all married or have girlfriends because
Yep.
when you get back to the precinct and it's like, all right, do you want to make a phone call? And we would be like, okay, listen, we'll tell your wife that you got arrested for a suspended license, but you're going to behave and not, be
Mhm.
a jerk while you're in custody and we'll get you out of here. But yeah, they were all always like married and girlfriends or whatever. And it's like, oh,
Yeah, and you're taking that back. Yeah, just
yeah.
it's nothing like TV. I'll just say that.
No, no. I mean, for a while, I was like, this is kind of like entrapment. Like, I'd be out there in like, the mini skirt with the leopard print jacket and, tank top and stuff and the heels. And I'm like, like guys are guys. This is, but then when you see the actual situation that these girls are in with, the pimps and they get beat up and it's like,
Oh yeah.
it's really actually a horrible scenario that these people are in. So if you can kind of, I guess, stem the tide of the demand, maybe the supply will not be needed, I guess. It
Yeah,
was the goal.
right, right. So let's switch gears here. You got promoted to detective. How far in your career did this happen? How many years were you a cop before you were a detective?
Oh gosh. Let's see. So I think I got promoted 2013. So I think I had like 12, 11 or 12 years on
Okay.
by then, I think.
So
Yeah.
why promote?
Um, So, I mean, in the NYPD, they have units that you can go to, like narcotics or vice, where it's kind of like a track where you do a certain period of time, like 18 months, and then you can get put in for your shield. And if you do, you can get a detective shield that way. It's not an
Okay.
exam that you take.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a promotion based on experience, which is
Oh,
good.
yeah.
Sergeant, lieutenant, captain, those are all promotional exams that you take. And then if you pass, then you can get, promoted. But the detective is more of a I guess a merit type of a thing where you kind of have to put in your time and then you get promoted. But the unit that I was in at the time was field intelligence. It was me and my boss, and we did intel at the precinct level. And at that time, it wasn't on a track to get your shield. But we were doing investigative work. I mean, I was doing we were doing wiretaps, we were doing search
Wow.
warrants, we were doing gun buys, narcotics buys. We
Yeah.
were doing major investigative work, and I loved it. And I didn't really care that I wasn't getting a shield, but I think the department came down and said, put 3 names in of 3 cops in your precinct that might deserve to be promoted, and
Yeah.
we'll choose one. So, I wrote up this whole thing of like you kind of have to like self promote. So, I'm
That's
like
tough. Yeah.
all the
Nobody
yeah, I'm
likes
like
doing
I'm not
that.
really good
Yeah.
at that
That
yet.
nobody is.
Like
That's
I'm
hard.
like Yeah, but the sergeants aren't going to do it. Like, I mean, you're a boss. It's like, no, you do it, I'll sign it. And it's like, can't you just write this for me? Like, I don't know what to write. So, it was like you had to self-promote, but I ended up they picked me to get promoted, which was awesome. And when they told me, I worked very closely with my commanding officer, who was the guy who was in charge of the entire precinct. So I was constantly in and out of the office because he would need things, and we're up in robberies. What do you guys got for robberies? Are you doing any, operations for this or whatever?
Sure.
So it was a constant, like, you're in the squad, you're with the CO and all this other stuff. So he was a great guy. He was like one of the best bosses I ever worked for. So my boss comes up to me and he's like, "Yo, the CO wants to talk to you." And I'm like, "What the fudge what did I do?" I'm like, I don't do anything wrong. So I'm like, what happened? But I'm like, I just felt like I was in trouble. I'm like, here we
Yeah,
go. It's just like the inherent the flavor of it was like I'm in trouble for something. So I go into the office and I remember my lieutenant was sitting there, and I got brought down by my sergeant, and there's the CO, and he's sitting at his desk and he looks pissed. And I'm like, oh God. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I don't know what I did, but I apologize. It won't happen again. Please take mercy on me, because like, you gotta like play a fine political line sometimes. And I have a big mouth and I say what's on my mind. And I'm like, I must have pissed somebody off. So he let it go for like 2 seconds, but I think he saw like I was really concerned that I was in
sure.
trouble. And he's like, "You're getting promoted to detective." And I was
Aw.
like, "You guys suck." So yeah, so I was very honored. I was very honored. I wasn't expecting it. I really you type stuff up all the time and you just don't really think it's going to go anywhere. And I was
Sure.
honored. It was awesome.
That's awesome. Let's talk about, we call it something a little bit different, but the time you had a significant exposure incident, like a girl bit you. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. Yeah, she sucks, that girl.
Yep.
So it was, I mean, you're on patrol, so your job is not just to answer the radio, when you get a 911 call or whatever, but it's also to like write summonses. So you write movers, summonses, like, people running stop signs or red lights or cell phones, and then parking summonses, like people on hydrants and stuff. So, or handicap spots. So I was on one of the major boulevards that run through my precinct, and I see a car and it's on a hydrant. And I get kind of irritated at that because I'm sure it's the same for you. When the fire department gets there and they can't get their hose, it delays
Oh yeah.
their progress of putting a fire out and saving lives. But then what they also do is they're like, "Okay, you're going to park on a hydrant. Now we're going to take your windows out." And they just break all the
Oh
windows
yeah.
and run the hose right through the car, and they don't
Absolutely they
care.
will.
And
Yep.
and then I got to deal with like the fallout from that. So I said, okay, so that and like littering were like my pet peeves. I couldn't stand those two things. So I get out of the car with my partner and I start writing her summons for the hydrant. Well, I didn't know, it was unoccupied. And the driver, this female, comes running out and starts yelling at me and this, that, and the other thing. And I was putting the summons in the windshield, in the wiper. And I'm like, just ma'am, the radio's going off. I got 5 jobs going to, I just at that time there was a performance objective. So, you wrote
Okay.
summonses based on the things that you saw. So I wrote the summons, and it is what it is. Just have to answer for it. I mean, it's $180 summons. It was a hefty fine at that
Yeah,
time.
that's big.
And she's just mouthing off. She's just, screaming and yelling, not stopping. And I'm like, this chick's just out of control. And then she takes the summons and rips it up and throws it on the floor. And I'm like, so now a crowd's gathering, which in New York City statute, disorderly conduct is like, a behavior that causes a crowd to gather
Sure.
or
Yep.
whatever. And I'm like, you got to be, now everybody sees that this chick is like, now she's yelling at me and spitting and whatever. And now she rips up the summons. So I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So she gets back into her car. And I'm like, "Man, step out of your car for a minute." And she's like, "I'm not going anywhere." And me and my partner are just like, "I'm just done. I don't have time for this. The radio's
Right.
going off. They're raising me up." So I'm like, "Okay." So I grab her arm to handcuff it. And as I'm like trying to pull it, she's got it like stuck to the steering wheel, and I'm trying to pull it
Oh,
off. And she
that
just leans
sucks.
over and she bites my finger. And I was
Ah.
so grossed out that she bit my
Oh,
finger. Like, at least punch me. Like, handle this like a
right.
man. Like, you got to punch me in the face. You're gonna bite me. And I'm like, I was so grossed out that I actually just let go. And I'm like, oh man. And there's blood. Like, she really broke the skin. And I'm like, damn it, man. Like, now what diseases do you have that are just in
Right.
my body now? So my partner like maces her, so the mace is like all in the car, and I'm just trying to like get, so we had to call another car. We end up getting her handcuffed or whatever. So I go back to the precinct and now I got to process this arrest. And, the other fellow cops are like pissed off because they're like, you have this like nonsense arrest. The radio's off the hook. Now we got to
Oh
cover
yeah.
your sector,
Yep.
so like they're pissed off because you don't, and there were times when it's like, listen, don't bring in nonsense. If you have an arrest, you have
Yep.
an arrest, but don't like go look for trouble. The radio's too busy for that. So it was, I'm like, no, this chick bit me. Like, this is ridiculous. So I called the district attorney and I'm like, you always talk to the district attorney after you have an arrest. And I'm like, yeah, she bit me. So is there any way that we can find out what,
What
diseases
does
she
she has?
has? So I know
Yeah,
if I got to
right.
go on the cocktail or whatever. And they're like, well, there's HIPAA laws. And I'm like, well, screw the HIPAA laws. This chick bit me. Like, I have a right to know. Forget her privacy. She chose to abdicate her right to that privacy when she bit me and broke my
Right.
skin. And they're like, we can't tell you that. And I'm like, okay, so your option is like to go on the cocktail, which is the AIDS preventative, which at
Yep.
that time was like a month. It makes you really sick, or take your chances. And I'm like, I'm going to take my chances because I cannot sit at home for 30 days on a cocktail. I will lose my mind. So
Yep.
I got lucky.
Yeah,
I
people
didn't get
understand it's
anything.
like cops don't worry so much about getting into fights, getting shot or stabbed. I was worried about getting AIDS. I was worried about getting
Yeah.
hepatitis. It's like, and you bring it home, because
Yeah.
we were talking off camera. I had a significant exposure to hepatitis. The guy I'm rolling around on the ground with and swapping blood, both of our faces were all cut open. Yeah, and it affects you so much later. It's like, you're in the hospital and the doctor is like, well, try to avoid this, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, now this is like creeping into my personal life. Now I'm pissed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, this is bullshit. This is,
Yeah.
I'm so unhappy right now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's no bueno. Now you
Yeah.
wound up on the anti-cruelty unit. Is this the only one in the country? I've never heard of that before, like an anti-animal cruelty thing.
Yeah, the ASPCA had their own police. They had like 9 cops for the entire
Oh, they
city,
did.
which
Okay.
yeah, they did. And I think it was 2014 that they turned it over to the NYPD.
Mm,
I think mostly because simply like manpower. They were just overrun with calls for animal cruelty. And the NYPD has, 35,000 cops out there, so we were able to handle it better. So I had put in like an employee suggestion a few years prior that like we should do this for create a unit that handles only this type of situation because it's kind of a level of expertise that we never got training for to
right.
identify cruelty and how to investigate it. Um, so they created the unit. So the sergeant that was running it came to me and I was like, how can I say no to this? This is like a passion of mine.
Yeah.
So it was me, another detective, and the sergeant, and we just tried to start teaching cops how to investigate it, and it grew from there, which is awesome. I am not aware of other police departments that actually the actual police handle it. I know like most of the time it's like the SPCA will investigate it, or they'll have civilians with like police powers that can do animal cruelty investigations, but
Hmm.
I'm not aware of another department in the country that
Yeah.
has something like that. It was a very unique, it
Yeah.
was good,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because we would get animal cruelty calls, and a lot of the times, you didn't have a suspect unless, they're like it was in progress kind of thing. Obviously dog fighting is huge,
Yeah.
in certain neighborhoods. And you would get a call for, a dog that's chained to a telephone pole that lost,
Yeah.
that was half dead. And I remember the very first time seeing that, I'm working midnight to 8, and this poor dog, I don't know how long it had been out there, and I'm a huge, animal person. And I've seen, I don't know how many hundreds of dead bodies, and this was just like, oh my God, this poor thing was barely alive. And right away, I'm thinking to myself, Michael Vick, you could go rot in hell. You
Yeah.
know, it,
I hated the
people,
Eagles after that.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
People don't realize unless you've seen like the aftermath of something like that personally, and you're just like this poor, poor dog. And it's kind of like investigating a homicide where your victim can't really tell you the story. That takes a
Yeah.
skill set.
Yeah. A lot of the cops, I mean, you have to really preserve the scene and kind of get statements from people like who owned the dog, how long did you own the dog for? Like you kind of, I mean, it's not like it's the investigative questions are so important to document everything, because later on that's going to have an impact, especially after, the autopsy or the necropsy on the animal, or the vet gets its hands on it. But I mean, I remember there was a case in the Rockaways where like this dog was stabbed and shot, and it was basically tied to a door handle, and just they relentlessly stabbed and shot, and it was like a gang beef, and they were dog fighters, and to get back at the other gang they like killed the prize dog.
Oh, so
It was like
disgusting.
it's
Ugh.
yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like I've seen so many people shot, the babies, the
Oh yeah, I
people
just
dying on you and stuff, and it's like, okay, you just kind of deal with it and move to the next thing. But the animal cruelty really mentally hit me. Like I think I almost went into like a sort of a depression seeing
oh,
that every single day, because you can't get justice a lot of the time.
right.
The chain of custody sometimes is broken, or there's no cameras, or there's no witnesses, or you just have a
Yep.
dog that's dumped there. I mean, I'm sure it was the same for you. We would have dogs that were like I mean, there was one, I remember the dog was like tied to a sewer grate, and it
Oof.
was January, and it was like 6 degrees outside, and it was a short-haired dog, not meant to be outside. And
Right.
it's like there's no way of knowing whose dog this is. There's no microchip to scan. This dog's going to go to the pound, it's going to be euthanized, and that's it. So a
Yep.
lot of the time the dogs would come to the precinct, and it was like, okay, I'll take the dog home, post it on social media, put signs up, and if the owner comes, well, but a lot of cops took dogs home because you find them in these horrific conditions. And
Yeah.
it's like it's kind of sad, and it that one, the animal cruelty, I think, really beat on me,
Yeah.
that unit, just seeing that.
I
Yeah.
think that would be super tough, and I think we call it sensitive crimes. New York calls it special victims.
Special victims, yeah.
Yeah, dealing with like kid stuff and sexual assaults all day long. Ugh, God, God bless the people that do it. But I remember when we would get one of those hitches, everyone's just kind of like, ugh. This is one of our very least favorite things to do. But yeah, well, God bless you for doing it. And I hope it's still going because that's super duper important, I think.
Yeah,
So
it is, it's going strong, so it's good.
good. New Year's Eve. That's all hands on deck, right?
Yeah. Yeah. New
How
Year's Eve is so much fun in New York City.
did you ever miss one, or how does that work? Like everybody's got to work it, or like obviously it's a huge mobilization, but there's still 911 calls all over the city that have to be taken.
Yeah, so if you're off, you're going to be ordered in, which is another wonderful part of the police department, is that your days off are not necessarily sacred. The only things that are really
Right.
sacred are like your vacation pics. If you have your
Okay.
vacation pic, you're safe and you can't be ordered in, with the exception of, I think, 9/11 was the only time that was
Okay.
that was suspended. But so yeah, so if you're off, you're going to be ordered in, and you're probably going to get sent to Times Square for that. And if you're working, you're probably going to be working in the precinct, because the shots fired and the shootings are
Oh,
just off the charts on New
yep.
Year's Eve. So I worked Times Square a couple of times. That was a lot of fun. Freezing cold and brutal, but that was fun. So I did the Times Square detail a bunch, and then I worked in the precincts a lot. I actually had like a gun arrest on New Year's Eve, which was a great way to start the year. But yeah, it was always fun New Year's Eve, because it was always something crazy was going to happen for sure. And you know,
So you work Times Square, like how long of a shift would that be for a cop? And you just have like a foot post and it's like, here you are.
yeah, you take your Imodium before you go in, and you go in usually like, noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I think. And
Okay.
you and a bunch of cops get in the van. It's usually like a sergeant and 8 cops, and from every precinct, and you go in, and you basically are assigned a spot. One year I was right underneath the ball. I was like right there, and I'm
Oh wow.
staring up at it, and I'm like, this thing was like this big that you could see from the street, and I'm like, this is what everybody comes here for. I guess because you watch it on TV and it looks enormous, but in
Right.
real life it's like so tiny. I'm like, I need binoculars to see
Yeah.
the thing. These people are standing here. I'm getting paid. You people are standing here voluntarily. It's like 4 degrees outside. I
Oh
can't
God.
feel my feet. Everybody wears diapers. I mean, not the cops, the people who go,
Yeah, because
because you're
once
not
you
allowed to
leave,
leave
you
the
can't go
pen.
back, right?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
secure, I mean, the whole thing is cordoned off. It's a very secure
Oh
area,
hell no. That does not sound enjoyable to me at
No, it wasn't enjoyable for us. I mean, I would get those hand warmer things and put them in the pockets, but those die after a while, and you're
sure.
basically standing there. There's once in a while, like you go into like the McDonald's or something to use the bathroom, but you can't, and especially being a female, it's not very, it's not
Right.
easy
Yeah.
to go to the bathroom.
Right.
Much easier to be a dude. So, and then you're eating, like you get a meal, but like, what are you gonna, you either bring your food and, because there's
Yeah.
not really much places to go to eat, and you just kind of, you're standing there freezing for however many hours. You just kind of sit there and like BS with the guys you work with and hope that everything goes smoothly. You don't have any crazy people that set
So
something off.
how late do you work for that duty?
Usually when the ball drops, it's like 10 minutes of everybody drinking and celebrating and whatever, and then everything clears out. It's like mass
Mm,
exit to
okay.
get out because everybody's freezing and
Sure.
they got to go to the bathroom and
Oh
everybody
yeah.
everybody has to get out. So depending on like, because we would stay until sanitation had cleaned it up and the road was back open, so maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So it was
Oh,
a
that's pretty
guaranteed
quick.
12-hour day. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
but it wasn't too bad. Like the Thanksgiving Day parade, you got out of there relatively quickly,
Okay.
because everybody wants to get out and go home to eat. So those
Sure.
two details were like 12, 13, maybe 14 hours. It wasn't horrible.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's switch gears here. Let's talk about your book, 20 and Out. I really like the cover. That's
Thanks. Yeah.
that expression
I have
is priceless.
a
Yes, I absolutely love that cover. That expression
thanks.
is so good, and I highly recommend this book if you're a writer or if you're just curious to see what it's like to work in a day-to-day, as a New York City cop. You're kind of like going on a ride along, but you don't have to travel to New York City to do it. So you captured it very well. I
Thank
love
you.
the cover. The expression on your face. Could you explain it to us? I mean, that's priceless.
That was, yeah, this was the only consideration that I had for this book. It was like, that's the
Okay.
picture, because it really, like, I felt like that look was like, that's what happens when you get to like 20 years on being a cop. You're just done. So that particular job, it was during the riots, the George Floyd riots or
Hmm.
whatever. So the whole job had to be in uniform. So I had been in plain clothes for like 10 years of my career. So I was aggravated already that I had to be in uniform, and we had a search warrant that we had just executed, and the house had there's no air conditioning. It's the summertime, it's 1,000 degrees, I'm sweating. I put my head in the freezer because I was so hot and exhausted that I opened up the freezer and just stuck my head in there for 2 minutes just to try and cool off. And I'm like, you know what, guys, I said to my two partners, I'm like, I'm out, I'm done, we found the gun, you guys finish up here, I'm going outside, I can't, I'm done I'm just burnt out. So I went out and I leaned against the car and I was just like airing out my armpits, and I'm like, oh, I think I've had enough of this. And somebody snapped a picture of me and I'm like, give me the picture. Because I know that's going to end up all over the precinct or whatever. And I'm like, you
Oh
know
yeah,
what? Now
well.
it's going to be on the cover of my book.
That's awesome. I really loved the first chapter was great. It grabs your attention. And for me, it reminded me you're trying to do a foot sweep and it didn't work. And I immediately flashed back to, I told you before, I had a female partner and we had some just stupid college kid doing stupid college kid stuff and he talked himself into handcuffs and I'm trying to just put the cuffs on him and he's actively resisting. And I'm like, really, dude? And I'm thinking to myself, I always thought of myself as a fairly good fighter. I was in martial arts for a long time. I'm a fairly larger dude. And I'm like, yeah, this is some pukey little college kid, and I try a foot sweep, didn't work. I'm trying all this Jackie Chan shit and nothing's working. And I'm like, and my partner's just standing there laughing at me. And I'm just like, hey, a little help here. And she's just like, oh, this is
Yeah.
funny. And this guy's like, and I'm like, all right, finally, because you don't want to hurt him too much. Yeah, and then finally, no, he's eating Crete. I grabbed the back of his head, boom, down to the face down. I was like, all right, now you're going to jail for sure. But it never goes as planned. That's what you just never.
No, you learn fairly quickly that the karate moves that they teach you don't work, and it's kind of like where the head goes, the body will follow.
Yes.
So just get control of the head, and I mean, I had one where I tried to do that, and the weave came right off. So instead of like, I grabbed the hair, I did like a typical girl move where I grabbed the hair and like went, and the hair just came right off. And she was just sitting there. I'm like, oh
Now you got a
gosh, what
handful of
is
weave.
this is so gross. Like, why me? So yeah, it really doesn't. It's, people who resist, it just gets messy, and then of
Yeah.
course the cops pile on. So you end up getting hit half the time from cops who
Oh,
are like behind you
absolutely.
trying to get in there. And it's like,
Yep.
it's always a disaster. I always I mean, the fighting is it's inevitable. You're going to get into fights, but I always tried to like talk my
Oh,
way into
yep.
getting them to comply because it's just so much easier.
Oh, all day long, it just, again, I'm flashing back to, the old days. And I had a partner one time, inevitably when you're working like 7 at night till 3 in the morning or midnight to 8, you get bar time fights, and we're
Yeah.
always busy doing something else. And, the dispatcher was smart enough to hold them because eventually they get tired and they walk away. And maybe, the victim, i.e. the guy who lost, might call, but whatever. And we'd always have to go by, one time it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, and bar time in Milwaukee's 2, but you still have to go. So it's like, yeah, go to the bar fight that happened 2 hours ago. And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? So we go, and there's somebody's weave on the street, and he said, "Oh, look, it's tumbleweave." Yeah, and
Oh, that's genius.
the tumbleweave is just blowing across the street, and I'm like, "Oh, this is a good one." There's a broken
Oh, that's good.
heel. There's some tumbleweave. It's like, this is a good battle. I like it. It's like, so funny. Oh
Oh,
my
yeah.
gosh.
The
So,
winner goes to jail, the loser goes to the hospital. Yeah.
yep, absolutely. So, 20 and out. Why write the book?
I wrote it for my daughter originally. It wasn't really for the public consumption. It was intended to give it to my kid who is constantly asking me to tell her stories about when I was a police officer. And I mean, anybody who's a cop is like, you sit and think, what story is appropriate for me to tell an 8-year-old? And it's like maybe one out of the thousands that you have. So
Yeah.
I was like, how about I write it down for you and then you can read it when it's appropriate for you to read, like, in 30 years. And
Yes.
so I started writing and then it turned into a 400-page like monstrosity. So I said, well, let me go find like a publishing company or to come up with a cover and, to actually like print it. So it kind of just went from there, but it wasn't really, the intention was never to like write a book to like put it on Amazon and get it out there. It was really just to kind of compile all of my memories of the chaos of being a cop so that my kid could read about it and laugh at me. Because really, I mean, that's kind of the goal of the book is just to keep you laughing because it's like the ridiculous situations that I found myself in. And I mean, I talk about a couple of the cops that I work with that were shot and killed and stuff. And,
Yeah,
there's some serious stuff in there because we all deal with that and it affects you. It does. It
it does.
surprised me how much sometimes it affects you because you're so used to being immune to pain, emotional pain. You just kind of like you're numb to all that stuff.
Right, right.
Like a not a lack of empathy. You still have empathy, but you kind of just don't. It doesn't affect you. But things like that kind of hit home. So, but yeah, the whole book was really just kind of making fun of myself and laughing at the stuff that I got
That's
involved
awesome.
in.
So, future projects, are you gonna write more books?
Yeah, this ended up being kind of it was an annoying process of what because it took so long and it's
Oh
like the
yeah.
editing and whatever.
Yep.
It's like it's an exhausting process, but as I talk to other cops and as I even, read my own things that I wrote and whatever, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this and I remember this. So now I have like a running list of other jobs that I had forgotten about. I mean, I think I forgot more. Probably it's the same for you. You forget more
Oh,
than you remember.
all day
And I
long.
mean, I have cops calling me and saying, I remember you fell out of a car and you got up and kept running. And I was like, yo, this chick is nuts. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't remember doing that. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But okay, it sounds like something I would do. But yeah, so I started compiling. So I might write a second one. We'll see what happens.
Well, I will buy it for sure. I'm
Thank
sure it'll
you.
be
I
good.
appreciate that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for reading
Absolutely. So if
it.
your book becomes a movie, by you wind up on like Netflix or Amazon Prime, who would play you? Who would you want
Yeah.
playing you?
I don't I don't know because I feel like every like actress that I know is nice and I have a real rough side to me. That's not like, there's like I don't really know. That is really a hard thing to say like, like I don't know. I was thinking about that and I'm like I don't really have an answer for that. I don't maybe I could play myself because it's like
Well, you could. I'm thinking Scarlett Johansson with, dyed hair.
with
I
brown
think,
hair. Yeah,
yes, I
maybe.
think I think that'd be a good fit.
She's got like a
Yeah,
snarkiness about her
it'd
because
have to
I
be
was I
somebody
was
sassy and
yeah.
kind of like the tough exterior, and but the heart of gold,
Yeah.
the
It's in there. It's just
You're right.
really, really deep sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm definitely a handful. I say what's on my mind, which is abrasive a lot. But yeah, somebody with that type of that might be a good match.
All right. Well, let's go to the Cops and Writers Facebook group. I've got some questions here for you. All
Oh,
right.
cool.
Catherine Kovacic asks, looking forward to this one, as usual. Thank you, Catherine. I
Thank you,
assume
Kathy.
Detective Bartoldus started in New York City after the zero tolerance years, so wondered if crime patterns changed much during her career. Second question, are penalties for animal cruelty crimes tough enough? Thank you.
Oh, good questions. For the animal cruelty, I don't think so. I think
No, I don't think
animal
so either.
cruelty needs to be it as it's almost like a code of Hammurabi thing, like an eye for like I feel like
Yeah,
if you're able to hurt an innocent thing like that, it needs to be most of the crimes are misdemeanors. You know, starving an animal is like in New York City, so I or New York State actually. So I think that no, I don't think they're harsh enough. I think they need to be um more penalties, especially jail time. Most of the time it's a slap on the wrist or a
right.
fine. I think that the jail time needs to be increased, and I think that the level of felony or misdemeanor needs to be raised to make it. But again, coming along with that is also because there might be a harsher penalty, it might be harder to find out, or
Yeah.
so it's. But yeah, I don't think they're strong enough. I
Yeah, and
think there
then
needs to be more training as well for the police.
I agree. Now, like the zero tolerance, in crime, I think that she's referring to broken windows. So
Yeah,
what crime fighting strategy was like the thing when you were a cop?
we did a lot of the broken windows is where if the neighborhood looks messy with graffiti and people peeing and people drinking, that leads to more crime and higher
Yep.
crime. So if you address the base issues of quality of life issues, which was a unit that I was in for a while, then the other crimes will not occur. It works. There's no argument that it works when you don't enforce those little things, the little nonsense things, hopping the turnstile, you
Right.
catch the bad guys, you stop the crimes from happening. So um the zero tolerance policy, I don't know if it was a zero tolerance per se. There was discretion, but it was definitely enforced. The crimes like that were enforced and summonses were issued. And I mean, the gun arrest, I remember for a long time was a mandatory 2-year sentence. And because we were so active when I was in anti-crime and even sometimes in street narcotics that I was in, the perps knew not to carry in the precinct that I worked in. I mean,
Mm,
they would tell me that we know we're going to do 2 years if we get caught with a gun, and we know if we carry it, you guys are going to toss us on the street and find it. So we're going to go to jail. So we don't even carry. So to try and think of how many shootings we may have prevented because they just stopped carrying and left their guns at home,
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that helped. And I think I talked about this a little bit in the book too about the raise the age or whatever, where for a long time in my career, 16, if you did something and you were arrested at the age of 16, you were treated as an adult. They've raised that to 18. So I think they tried to do that to like not ruin juveniles' lives with
Yeah.
arrest, so that it was kind of once you hit it as an adult, it's kind of like expunged and it's sealed. That did not have the effect that it was intended. It only encouraged kids to do more
Oh,
crime and actually
absolutely.
have the gang guys and the old timer criminals get the younger guys to carry their guns and
Yep.
to carry their drugs and do all that stuff because the kids were like, you're not going to go to jail. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal.
Right.
So it actually got more kids involved in crime. There was no penalty. So by the time they hit 18, it was like they're already doing major robberies, street
Yep.
robberies. So I think you have to have stop, question, and frisk. No question about it. It has to be done. There has to be the civilians are not affected by higher levels of policing. They're affected by
Right.
more hands-off policing. So
Yes.
I think in my experience, and I mean you have to follow laws. There's levels of suspicion and what you can do with whatever level of suspicion you're at, and we always stuck with that. I mean, we didn't abuse our authority. I certainly never did, and I never saw that with the people that I worked with. But you have to be able to let the perps know that if you're out there and you're looking for trouble, we're going to find you and we're going to stop it. And that's going to be the end of it. Because, and not only that, but when we do put you in jail, the district attorneys are going to prosecute you, and you're going to get jail time, and you're not going to be, able to go home for Thanksgiving. And I think that alone is enough of a deterrence. The omnipresence of cops, knowing cops are going to get out and do something. And we've lost that in society, I think, in general,
Yeah,
that,
I wholeheartedly
yeah,
agree with you. And then you were talking about like a gun cases, like mandatory 2 years. If that was a mandatory 15-year sentence, well, guess what? There wouldn't be so much gun crime. Violent
yeah,
crime would go down. I just get a kick out of, I don't want to get political, but it's like we need more common sense gun laws. We've got a gazillion gun laws that aren't enforced, or enforced so lackadaisical that they have zero effect. More laws aren't going to do jack. It's like if you have, carrying a concealed weapon, if somebody's toting a gun around and it's illegal for them to do it, throw the book at them. It's like
yeah.
drunk driving laws. I was in Belfast, Ireland in 2019. I met a buddy of mine to go out for a beer, and long story short, he orders a half a pint of Guinness, and I'm like, and he lives in Belfast, and I'm like, half a pint. I'm like, Liam, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, you don't understand the laws here. He said, they'll take my van. I'm like, what? He says, yeah, they'll take my van. He says, that's my livelihood. That's my job. He says, we don't mess around with drunk driving here. And he said, they don't need probable cause to stop you for drunk driving.
Wow.
It's like, oh, look, it's 2:30 in the morning and you're driving. I'm going to stop you to see if you're drunk. But guess what?
Yes. Yeah.
Nobody drive. There are like
Right.
fatalities for drunk driving. The incidence of drunk driving is in the basement. Everybody knows it's like, you don't do it because the penalty is so harsh.
Yeah. Yeah,
If
I'm very big on, like, there's a fine line between the overreach of government and
yes,
abusive policing and whatever, and preventing crime from happening and making communities safe. And I think when I first came on the early 2000s, there was that happy medium where we did keep the streets safe, and the perps knew we're out here and you're going to be
yeah,
stopped. And
absolutely.
we had our precinct on lockdown. I mean, there was the shootings plummeted, the gun possession plummeted, the shots fired plummeted, robberies, because
Yep,
they knew they were going to be caught, and the cops weren't afraid to use the minimum force necessary to effect an arrest.
right.
And it's definitely gotten away from that, and it's not a
It
good
has.
thing for the general public.
I totally agree. All right, Anka Melinda Kalulu asks, I can't wait. Thank you, Anka. What's it like to be a woman detective? What are some of the myths, truths, and challenges about being a female detective in a field that's mostly dominated by men?
Wow, that's a tough question. I don't it was, I guess, I think when I first came on, there weren't that many females. The females that were there were hardcore. Like, these girls are tough
Yeah,
chicks. Like, they were almost even heavier than the dudes. Like, they were just, you didn't mess with them. Um, so I kind of emulated that because that's what I want to be, that too, and I think on the street with the perps, I think it helps sometimes to be a female because I have the ability to have the empathetic. Women are inherently a little bit more understanding and softer, and you can kind of schmooze a little bit better and get the sympathy of people or whatever, but you're also looked at as the weaker link. So there are
sure.
some perps, if they don't want to go to jail, they're going to go after you
Yep.
because it's easier to take you out than the guy. From the perspective, so that's the street perspective, but from the fellow detective perspective, I think I didn't notice myself being treated any differently because I'm a girl. I didn't feel that way. I think for the police department as a whole, everybody's kind of like a unisex type of one person, and you're all treated equally until you find out, like, well, this person is not going to help you if you call for help, and
Right.
then they get ostracized. So it doesn't matter what your skin color is, what your religion is, what your sex is. If you're not going to back your fellow cops up and help them if they need help, that's what makes you ostracized. So for a
Yep.
female, I kind of was able to prove myself that, if you're in a fight, I'm not going to run away. I'm going to jump in there and help you and, get this guy in handcuffs. So you earn the respect which is, it was very important to me. But I think it also helped with other detectives, because I feel like sometimes if they had a perpetrator, or, they were doing a questioning thing or something, a lot of the time, because the way that I'm able to talk to people, perpetrators feel more comfortable with me. They feel like
Sure.
they can trust me and talk to you. So you would get confessions and, admissions and stuff because of that. But eh, on a police department level, cop to cop, there is no, I didn't feel any difference. I don't feel like I was treated any differently because I was a girl, but that's because I showed that I can hang with the guys type of a
Right.
thing. Like I'll back you up. And I think that's um I don't know, I wish that would spill over into society in general, instead of having all these separations. Like I kind of touched on this in the book, of like everybody has their little corner that they go into, instead of like being united in the
Sure.
police department. It's kind of like there's no atheist in the foxhole. It's like if you're
Yep.
in a fight, I do not care who's coming to help me. If I call for
Yep.
help, and I don't care who's coming to help me, I don't care what race they are. If you're coming to help me, I am grateful for you. Thank you. And I'm going to back you up as well. And that is what unifies cops, is backing each other up. And the people who get, I guess, ostracized, or just kind of like left on the side, are the ones who are like, yeah, I run in the other direction if
Right.
the shit
Yeah.
hits the fan.
The very worst thing is a coward. It's you do
Yeah.
not want to be labeled that. You're done,
No.
because that will spread like wildfire.
Yeah, and
And
you don't want to work with a coward, because
no,
yeah.
yeah, and what you're saying rings true with just about every female copper that I have interviewed. I was interviewing a gal, Marie O'Halloran. She was a Garda in Ireland. And the same question was asked of her, and she said, what I have seen is, as far as like chauvinistic attitudes or whatever, is mostly from the public, not my like partners, not
Yeah.
the fellow cops. She was at a crime scene or whatever, and the guy is like, well, aren't you going to hoover my house? The, he wanted to
Yeah.
vacuum up. I was like, really? And she said, there's a bunch of guys here. How come you're not asking them to vacuum the house? It's like, but that's, yeah. Oh boy.
It's the
Uh,
public that has a misperception of
yes,
women and whatever. It's not, I didn't, and I think probably that's part of like my humor too, is like I grew up hanging out with guys. I didn't really have a lot of girlfriends, so it wasn't much of a adjustment for me. I kind of got the guy humor, and you ball
sure.
bust along with the best of them, and you just got to
Absolutely.
prove that you can hang. That's it, and you're
All
fine.
right. We're starting to run really short on time.
Oh,
This
sorry.
is, no, that's okay. John Friese, I'll go one more. Not a joke. In the early 90s, guys would get arrested for sucking the tokens out of the turnstiles. We called them token
Oh my gosh.
suckers. And he's still around when you were a rookie.
You know what? It's funny. I remember the
Oh,
tokens. The
oh,
tokens were taken away. That they were that's so funny. If you have still subway tokens, it's like a memorabilia thing. So they switched it to Metro cards.
okay.
So the Metro cards was like a swipe, but the guys we called them swipers. So you would like pay them like $1 and they would swipe you on to get to the subway. And there was like a whole, you would arrest them for like
Yeah.
fare evasion and stuff. But there was a way that you would bend the Metro card so that the machine it would read it as a paid thing instead of not paid. Like they figured out how
Oh,
to do it. So that was the scam when I was in transit. The tokens had already been removed and the Metro card had taken its place.
interesting. All right. Let's wrap this up. Where do people go if they want to learn more about you and your book?
My book is currently available on Amazon, under 20 and out, with my wonderfully hysterical non-glamour shot face there. So that's where it's sold currently right now.
All
So that'd
right.
be
Do you have
great
a
if you
website
want to check
or
it out.
do you have a website or
No,
an email address?
no, I don't. I'm like just
Okay. We'll work on that.
regular chick, like yeah.
We'll work on that.
Just
All
getting
right.
going. So I barely have a Facebook page. So yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I had so much fun.
I had a great time. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was great.